The hall inside the local music academy felt different that day. It was usually a quiet place where students practiced their scales and simple pieces, but now it was filled with the weight of expectation. A famous maestro had arrived to give a masterclass, and everyone in the academy knew this was not an ordinary visit. Students filled the rows of chairs, some whispering, some sitting up straight with nervous excitement. Even the teachers stood near the back, hoping to see something that would inspire them too. Among the students sat a teen who had been preparing for this day for weeks. She didn't speak much to the others and didn't try to join their excited conversations. Instead, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, breathing quietly, replaying the notes of her chosen piece in her mind. She had practiced it every day after school, staying late in the practice room until the last staff member told her it was time to go home. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just loved the piece, the way its melody rose and fell like a breath, the way it let her emotions travel through her fingertips. When the maestro entered, the room fell silent. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had performed on great stages and spoken to large crowds. His reputation was known not only for skill, but also for being very honest, sometimes too honest. During master classes, the students sat up even straighter as he greeted the room. He gave a short introduction about the importance of expression, discipline, and control. His tone held experience, but it also carried a sharp edge that made many students nervous. One by one, students went up to the piano. Some played confidently, others struggled, but the maestro treated each performance with the same strict evaluation. He pointed out mistakes directly, sometimes making students shrink with embarrassment. A few students glanced toward the teen, wondering how she would handle him. She didn't look back at them. Her eyes stayed on the polished black surface of the piano. When her name was finally called, she stood slowly and walked to the front. Her steps were steady, but her heartbeat felt loud in her chest. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The hall felt too quiet, as if the walls leaned closer to listen. She began to play. The first notes came out softly, shaped with care. She wasn't rushing or trying to show off. She simply let the music flow, just as she had practiced. But she had barely reached the second line of the piece when the maestro raised his hand sharply. The sound of the piano stopped immediately. "Stop," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. A wave of tension rippled through the audience. The teen looked up at him quietly, waiting for guidance, but his expression was not gentle. "You're playing the notes," he said, "but that's all you're doing. There is no weight, no feeling. You don't understand this piece yet. Anyone can press keys, but that doesn't make it music." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, unable to watch the moment unfold. The teen's hand stayed resting on the keyboard. She didn't flinch or argue. She just listened. The maestro continued, his tone firm. "This piece requires depth, experience, heart. At your age, you barely know what the world feels like. So how can you expect to express what the composer wanted?" The teen kept her face calm, but inside she felt a small sting. Not because of his criticism. She had heard harsh comments before while learning difficult pieces, but because he said she couldn't understand the music because of her age. She believed that anyone who cared deeply about something could understand it, no matter how young they were. The maestro turned slightly toward the audience as if using her as an example. "Technique alone isn't enough," he said. "You must feel every phrase. But if you don't know what the feeling is, you can't create it." A quiet murmur traveled through the students. Many of them had admired the teen's dedication and knew how much effort she put into practice. Some felt protective of her, wanting to speak up, but no one dared. The maestro's authority was too strong. The teen finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "May I try again from the beginning?" Her request sounded polite, not defensive, but the maestro shook his head. "No," he said. "There's no point in repeating the same mistake. You need to learn to listen before you play. Watch closely." He stood and walked toward the piano. The room grew even more silent. The students leaned forward, eager and tense, as the maestro took her place at the bench. No one doubted his skill. He had performed all over the world, and his recordings were studied by many. The teen stepped aside and stood near the edge of the piano, watching him settle in. His expression was confident, even slightly impatient, as if he wanted to show the entire room how the piece should truly be played. He placed his fingers on the keys and began. The first note sounded stronger, more assertive, as if he wanted to prove a point. The audience nodded quietly at his control, but as the piece progressed to the more emotional passage, something shifted. His hands slowed for a moment. A slight hesitation appeared, small enough that only trained players would notice, but enough to break the flow. The students exchanged confused glances. The teen kept her eyes fixed on his fingers, noticing every detail. The maestro pushed forward, trying to smooth out the moment. But the next few measures didn't come as cleanly. There was a pause, then a second attempt, then a brief tightening of his jaw. He didn't stop. But it was clear that the difficult passage wasn't going the way he intended. The audience held their breath. They had expected flawless performance. Yet here he was struggling with the very section that mattered most. The tension in the room grew heavier with every second. The maestro finally lifted his hands off the keys, letting the sound fade. He didn't look at the audience, nor at the teen. Instead, he stared at the keyboard as if searching for something he had misplaced. A quiet whisper moved through the room, but no one dared to speak loudly. The teen looked at the piano, then at the maestro, her expression calm, not mocking. She knew the passage was hard. She had spent months mastering it, but she never imagined she would witness him falter in front of everyone. The maestro cleared his throat and stood up quickly, trying to regain his posture. He turned toward the audience with a stiff expression, as if hoping they would ignore what had just happened. The students avoided eye contact with him, unsure how to react. The teen stepped forward slightly and spoke again, her tone humble. "May I try again?" she said, "starting from the part you played?" Her voice carried no challenge, only sincerity. She truly wanted to play, not to outshine him, but to show the music the respect it deserved. The maestro hesitated. For a moment, he looked at her as if weighing his pride against her request. The students watched closely. Even the teachers waited, understanding how delicate the moment was. Finally, he gave a small nod and stepped aside. The teen sat down at the bench again. Her hands hovered over the keys, but this time her breathing felt different. The room was the same. The audience was the same. But the weight of the moment had changed. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was someone who had something to say through the music. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, ready to begin the passage the maestro had struggled with. And as the hall fell silent again, everyone leaned forward, waiting for her to play. The hall stayed silent as the teen placed her fingers on the keys. The students, the teachers, even the maestro himself seemed to hold their breath. No one expected the moment to unfold this way. Moments before, she had been stopped and criticized in front of everyone. Moments before, the maestro had taken her place to demonstrate the passage, but struggled with it in a way no one dared to comment on. Now she sat there again, calm and steady, ready to try the part he couldn't complete. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound of the room settle inside her mind. She wasn't thinking about the audience or the maestro or the pressure sitting heavy on her shoulders. She thought only about the music she had practiced over and over until her fingers knew every shift, every curve of the melody. She took a slow breath, opened her eyes, and began. The first notes flowed out gently, almost as if she were whispering through the piano. She didn't rush, she didn't force anything. Her hands moved with a quiet confidence that surprised many in the audience. The difficult passage approached, and the room tensed again. This was the moment the maestro couldn't move through cleanly. This was the moment everyone expected to be too much for her too. But when she reached it, her fingers did not hesitate. They glided across the keys with a soft strength, shaping each note carefully. The melody rose, delicate but firm, like a steady breath rising through the air. The room grew still as the notes connected in a smooth ribbon of sound. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but it had something powerful in it, something honest. Some students leaned forward, eyes widening. They had never seen her play with such clarity. The teachers exchanged surprised glances. No one had expected her to handle the passage so easily, especially after being stopped so early before. But here she was, allowing the music to lead her hands faithfully, as if every note had lived in her for a long time. The maestro stood with his arms crossed, watching her closely. For a long moment, his face held no expression at all. It was unclear if he was impressed, confused, or simply caught off guard. He had come to the academy expecting to guide young players, correct their mistakes, and show them the right path. Yet now he found himself watching a team perform a section he himself had faltered on. It was a strange feeling for him, unfamiliar and slightly uncomfortable. The team continued the passage with a calm rhythm. Her touch was gentle but sure. She shaped the final part of the phrase with soft detail, letting it fall like a quiet sigh at the end. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the sound faded slowly, leaving the hall in deep silence. No one clapped yet. No one dared to interrupt the stillness the music left behind. The teen sat still, hands resting lightly on her lap, waiting for the maestro to speak. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at him. She simply waited with the same quiet patience she had shown since she first sat down. The maestro took a slow breath. For the first time since the masterclass began, he didn't immediately respond with criticism or instruction. He stared at the piano for a short moment, as if revisiting the notes in his mind. He knew what he had just heard. He knew she had played with a depth that surprised him, and he knew the students had witnessed every second of it. He stepped forward, trying to gather himself. "You played it differently," he said at last. His voice was quieter now, not as sharp as before. The teen looked up politely. "I just played the way I practiced," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried truth. She wasn't trying to challenge him. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She had simply played the music the way she learned to understand it. A soft wave of whispers moved through the students. Some were amazed, some were confused, others felt inspired. They had seen many masterclasses before, but none with a moment like this. The maestro cleared his throat and straightened his posture, trying to regain control of the class. "Continue," he said, gesturing toward the piano. "Play from the next section." His tone sounded more controlled now, but there was a hint of something else behind it, perhaps respect, perhaps discomfort, or perhaps curiosity. The teen nodded, placed her hands on the keys again, and began the next part. This section was lighter, more playful. Her fingers danced with soft energy, shaping each phrase with gentle movement. The melody rose and spun through the air like a small breeze. The audience watched her, many forgetting to blink as they listened. She played with the same ease she had shown before, allowing the music to guide her. The maestro paced slowly at the side, listening intently. He studied her posture, her hand movements, and the way she breathed between phrases. He had criticized her earlier for lacking emotion, but now he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Her expression was calm, but her playing held a quiet warmth. She didn't show emotion through dramatic gestures or exaggerated expressions. Instead, she poured it quietly into the notes. As she continued, the audience grew more connected to her performance. The teachers near the back exchanged soft nods. Some of the students even forgot their own nervousness for a moment, completely absorbed in her playing. When she reached the end of the second section, the maestro raised his hand lightly, signaling her to stop. She lifted her fingers gently from the keys and turned slightly to face him. He didn't speak right away. He walked closer, his step slow and thoughtful. He looked at the keys, then at her, then at the audience, as if trying to decide how to address the moment. Finally he said, "Your technique is steady, your timing is clean, but more than that, your attention to detail is stronger than I expected." His voice held a firm but honest tone. The teen nodded respectfully. She didn't smile, but her eyes showed a quiet appreciation for the words. One of the students in the back whispered to a friend, "He's complimenting her." Another whispered back, "I've never seen him do that in a class before." The maestro heard the whispers, though he pretended not to. He folded his arms slowly, then spoke again. "You still need work on projection," he said. "Your sound is soft. In a large hall, it may not reach every corner." The teen nodded again. "I understand. I'll work on it." Her voice was calm, not defensive. The maestro blinked, almost surprised at her simple acceptance. He expected resistance or nervousness. Instead, she listened with the same steady patience she had shown since she first walked to the piano. He took a step back and addressed the entire room. "Every musician has strengths and weaknesses," he said, "even experienced ones." His words hung in the air, and some students wondered if he was referring to himself. The teen looked down at her hands quietly, not making any expression. The maestro turned back to her. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Continue to the next part." She placed her fingers on the keys once more. As she played, the room settled into a quiet rhythm, as if the music had filled the space with a calm that everyone needed. The notes moved smoothly, carrying the audience along with them. With each phrase, the maestro seemed to watch her more closely. He wasn't just evaluating anymore. He was studying her, trying to understand how someone so young could bring such steady clarity to a piece that even seasoned players struggled with. The teen didn't think about any of that. She simply played, letting the music move through her in the way she had learned during long practice hours. The energy in the hall softened as the melody unfolded again. When she reached the final measure of the part, the sound faded into the hall. This time, the maestro did not interrupt. He simply watched as she lifted her hands gently from the keys. The room stayed silent, waiting. The maestro finally exhaled and said, "Take a short break." His voice sounded different now, calmer, more thoughtful. The teen stood up slowly from the piano bench. As she walked back to her seat, several students moved aside to make space for her. Their eyes filled with respect. Some even nodded at her, small gestures to show they were impressed. She sat quietly, keeping her hands folded in her lap. The maestro looked at the audience and then at the piano. Something in his expression had changed. It wasn't defeat or embarrassment, it was reflection. The room felt different now. Everyone knew the story unfolding in front of them was no longer ordinary. And as the break continued in quiet whispers, the teen sat calmly, knowing her performance had shifted something in the hall, something even the maestro had not expected.
The hall lights dimmed slowly as the teen pianist stepped backstage again, still shaken from everything that had happened earlier. She kept replaying the maestro's harsh words in her mind, even though she had just stunned the whole hall with her first performance. It felt strange to her, because part of her was proud, yet another part still felt the sting of his criticism. She wasn't someone who forgot things easily, even if the people around her told her not to let it bother her. She stood near the thick curtains, feeling the cool air brushing against her face. She could hear the murmurs of the crowd settling down, waiting for the next part of the event. Her fingers lightly tapped against her thigh, the way they did every time she felt nervous. She looked at the polished piano under the stage lights. It almost felt like it was calling to her again. She knew she had done something people did not expect. She also knew the maestro didn't want to be embarrassed in front of his own audience. She had seen the shock on his face. Even from where she stood, she remembered his expression clearly. A woman who worked backstage walked over to her with a soft smile. She had been kind to her earlier, always speaking with a calm tone that helped the teen relax. The woman whispered that the audience kept talking about her performance. She told her the hall had never been that quiet before. The teen listened, but kept her eyes on the stage. She didn't want all this attention, but at the same time, she felt a strange warmth in her chest, like something inside her had finally woken up. A few moments later, the maestro returned backstage. His footsteps were heavy, almost sharp. He looked frustrated, though he tried to hide it. The teen noticed how he avoided looking at her at first. The staff around them stopped moving for a moment, waiting to see his reaction. When he finally turned toward the teen, there was something different in his eyes. Not anger, not confidence. Something more like confusion mixed with pride. He didn't want to admit. He told her in a quiet voice that her performance had surprised him. The teen didn't know how to respond. She could feel everyone paying attention to their exchange, even though nobody spoke openly. The maestro took a small breath and asked where she had learned to play the old unfinished piece. The teen looked down, remembering the dusty sheets of music she had found months ago in a small store that no one visited anymore. She told him she found it by accident and played it because it felt meaningful to her. He seemed stunned. He explained that he had worked on that piece many years ago, but never completed it. Every time he tried, he felt something missing. He had abandoned it after losing confidence in himself. The teen didn't realize the weight of the music she had brought to life. She just played it the way her heart guided her. The maestro looked away as if trying to control his emotions. It was the first time he looked genuinely unsure. The woman backstage gently placed a hand on the teen's shoulder and whispered that the audience wanted an encore. The teen froze for a moment. She wasn't used to crowds, applause, or attention. The maestro heard the request too. His expression softened. He asked if she would play the rest of the piece again, but this time with him on stage. The staff members around them exchanged curious glances. No one expected him to ask such a thing. The teen felt her heart speed up. She agreed with a small nod. The maestro stepped out first as the curtains opened again. The hall lit up brighter, and applause rose instantly. The teen stayed behind the curtain for a few seconds, trying to breathe steadily. She didn't want to let fear take control. She took one quiet breath, then stepped out into the lights. The entire audience turned their eyes to her. She felt a wave of warmth wash over her when she heard them applauding again. The maestro stood beside her at the piano. He bowed slightly toward her as a way of showing respect. She did the same. They took their seats together. The hall grew silent. The maestro placed his fingers on the keys first. Then she joined lightly, following his lead. For a moment, she thought she might lose herself in the pressure, but the music carried her forward. He played the opening parts with grace, letting the original melody breathe slowly in the hall. Then she followed, filling the notes with the same feeling she had shown earlier. As they played together, something changed. Instead of fear or embarrassment, the music turned into a conversation between them. The audience leaned forward, watching the story unfold through each note. The maestro glanced at her once, and it was not the look of someone judging. It was the look of someone who had found a missing part of himself again. She realized she wasn't just playing music. She was helping him complete something he had tried to finish years ago. The unfinished piece slowly took shape as their hands moved across the keys with a kind of harmony that couldn't be forced by the time they reached the final notes. The hall was completely silent. They held the last chord together, letting it fade naturally. When it ended, the audience erupted into applause far louder than before. The teen felt her chest tighten from the overwhelming sound, but she also felt proud. This was something she never imagined happening. The maestro stood up first and gently encouraged her to stand with him. The audience continued clapping, some even standing from their seats. The teen's hands trembled slightly as she bowed. She could feel a sense of disbelief rushing through her as they left the stage again. The maestro stopped her near the curtains. He spoke softly, telling her that the piece finally felt complete. He said he never expected someone so young to understand the heart of his music, but she did. She didn't know what to say, but she bowed her head in gratitude. The backstage crew gathered around them. Some congratulated her, some offered warm smiles, and some simply looked impressed. The woman who had been helping her earlier gave her a proud nod. The teen felt surrounded by kindness in a way she wasn't used to. The maestro asked her if she would return for the final part of the event later that evening. He said he wanted her to stand beside him when he spoke to the audience. She hesitated, unsure if she deserved such a moment. But he insisted gently, saying that she had earned it. She agreed quietly. For the rest of the break, she sat in a corner with her hands folded in her lap. She watched people walking around and preparing for the next performances. Her mind kept going back to the music. She couldn't believe she had helped complete a piece written by such a respected figure. She wondered if she would wake up and realize all of this was a dream. When the event resumed, the maestro kept looking toward backstage as if checking whether she was still there. He seemed more relaxed now. The teen could tell he felt differently, like a burden he had carried for years had finally lifted as the final moment of the night approached. She stood ready near the curtain again. Her heart was steady this time. She knew what she had done. She knew she had made a difference. And she didn't feel small anymore. She waited for the call to step forward, knowing that this part of the evening would shape everything that came next.
The teen pianist stood backstage once again, waiting for the moment when she would be called out for the final part of the evening. The lights on the other side of the curtain glowed softly against the floor, and she could hear the murmur of the audience settling down after the short break. Her hands rested gently together, but this time they were not trembling the way they had earlier. Something inside her felt calmer, steadier. Maybe it was the music they had just played. Maybe it was the way the maestro had spoken to her after the duet, without pride or anger, but with honesty. The woman who had been guiding her throughout the evening came to check on her again. She asked if the teen needed water, or time to breathe, or just someone to stand beside her. The teen shook her head softly and smiled. She appreciated the kindness more than she could express with words. The woman touched her shoulder lightly and whispered that everyone out there was waiting to hear what the maestro had to say about her. The teen didn't know how to respond, so she just lowered her gaze. Across the backstage area, the maestro was standing alone for a moment. His hands were folded behind his back, and for the first time that evening, he looked peaceful. A stagehand approached him, telling him it was almost time. He nodded and took a slow breath, then looked over at the teen. Their eyes met, and he motioned for her to come closer. She walked toward him quietly, unsure of what he would say. When she reached him, he spoke in a gentle tone she had never heard from him before. He told her that music sometimes hides its truth until the right person comes along. He said he had struggled for years to finish that piece, not because the notes were difficult, but because he had lost something inside himself. He said she had brought that missing feeling back. The teen listened silently, feeling the warmth of his words settle over her. She wasn't used to praise, especially from someone with such a high position and reputation. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. A stagehand lifted the curtain slightly and gestured that it was time. The maestro straightened his jacket and stepped toward the light. Before he walked on stage, he turned to the teen and told her to follow him when he said her name. She nodded again. The maestro walked onto the stage, and the audience applauded loudly. The lights brightened as he reached the center, standing tall but not as tense as before. He looked out over the hall, taking a moment to appreciate the silence that followed. He began to speak, thanking everyone for coming and mentioning how much the evening meant to him. He talked about music, about how it connects people and reveals parts of them they often keep hidden. The audience listened closely. Then he paused and mentioned the unfinished piece. He spoke about how long ago he had written it, during a time when he felt fully alive, only for life to change in ways he didn't expect. He explained how he had tried for years to complete the composition, but could never fill the empty spaces. He said the music had remained untouched, locked in time. The audience leaned forward, sensing something important coming. Then he said softly that earlier in the evening, someone had played that same unfinished piece in a way he had never imagined. He said she gave the music something he had lost. The hall filled with whispers. He said her name. Backstage, the teen inhaled sharply. She stepped forward as the curtain parted. The lights felt warm on her skin. The audience turned toward her, some smiling, some curious, some amazed. She walked slowly toward the maestro, who stepped aside slightly to give her space. She stood next to him, not knowing what to do with her hands. He continued speaking, telling the audience that the duet they played earlier had been the first time. He felt the piece was whole. He said he owed her gratitude for helping him rediscover something he thought was gone forever. The audience applauded again, softer this time but full of warmth. The teen lowered her head, feeling shy but grateful. Then the maestro asked her if she wanted to say anything. She froze. She had not expected this. Her heart started racing again. She looked at him, and he gave her a small nod as if telling her she didn't have to say much, just whatever was in her heart. She looked out at the crowd. It felt overwhelming, yet she reminded herself that she had played in front of them earlier. She tried to breathe and then spoke softly. She explained that she found the music by accident in an old shop. She said she didn't know who wrote it at the time, but felt something in it that she could not explain. She said she only played it because it made her feel calm. Her voice trembled, but her words were honest. The audience listened quietly. The maestro stood beside her with a gentle expression. She finished by saying she never thought her playing would matter to anyone, and she felt grateful for the chance to share the music. A long, heartfelt applause filled the hall. Some people even stood again. The teen felt tears sting her eyes, but she held them back. The maestro thanked the audience once more and signaled that the event was nearing its end. He asked the teen if she would like to play a short piece to close the night. She hesitated, unsure if she had the strength left, but the audience encouraged her with soft claps. She nodded. The maestro stepped back, giving her the stage. The hall dimmed slightly, leaving a gentle spotlight over the piano. She sat down, took one calm breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. This time she chose a simple melody, not complicated, not grand, just soft and warm. She played the notes with honesty, letting them drift through the air like a quiet conversation. There was no pressure, no fear, no judgment. It felt like she was telling her own story. The hall remained silent until the final note faded. Then the applause rose again. She stood slowly, bowed, and stepped back from the piano. As the curtains closed for the night, The maestro approached her once more. He told her that her music had touched more hearts than she could imagine. He said he wanted to talk with her later, not about corrections or lessons, but about possibilities, future performances, chances to learn, chances to grow. She felt her breath catch. She had never imagined anyone offering her a future like that. The staff congratulated her, some patting her lightly on the shoulder as she walked backstage. She kept her eyes down, not because she was shy, but because she was trying not to cry from the mix of emotions building inside her. The woman who had been helping her all night wrapped an arm around her gently and whispered that she should be proud. The teen nodded, unable to speak. As the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, she sat alone on a small bench near the backstage wall. She listened to the distant sounds of people cleaning up, gathering equipment, and talking softly among themselves. For the first time, she let herself breathe fully. She looked back at the piano on stage, now dark and quiet. She realized how far she had come in a single evening, how much had changed, how much had awakened, and she wondered what would come next. When the hall finally emptied and the staff finished their work, the teen pianist slowly left the backstage area. The night air felt cool against her skin as she stepped outside, and the quietness around her made everything feel almost unreal. She paused on the steps outside the building, letting the breeze calm her racing thoughts. So much had happened in just one evening that her mind struggled to catch up. She looked up at the soft glow of the streetlights and tried to understand how her life had changed. So suddenly, as she stood there, she heard footsteps behind her. The maestro walked out, carrying a small folder under his arm. He nodded gently when she turned toward him. He looked different now, not strict, not distant, but almost warm. He approached her slowly, as if trying not to overwhelm her. He told her he had something for her. She watched him open the folder and take out a sheet of music. It was the same incomplete piece she had played earlier, but now it looked different. Notes filled the empty spaces. The melody was complete at last. He handed it to her carefully, as though it were something valuable. He said the music had been waiting for its final shape, and she was the one who helped him find it. He said that even though he wrote the piece, she brought it to life with a feeling that could not be taught. The teen held the sheet tightly, unsure how to respond. She had never been given something so meaningful. The maestro continued speaking softly. He told her he wanted her to keep the final version of the piece. He said it belonged to her now just as much as it belonged to him. She stared at the handwritten notes, still surprised. He then asked her if she would consider studying under him. Not because she needed to be improved, he said, but because he believed she had potential that should not go unnoticed. He explained that she played with instinct and emotion, which were things many people spent years trying to achieve. The teen's heart beat faster. She had never imagined this kind of opportunity. She looked down, unsure if she deserved it. But the maestro stepped a little closer and told her that her talent was real. Her feelings were real. Her music was real, and she should not doubt it. She nodded slowly. He smiled for the first time that evening. It was small, gentle, almost shy. He told her he would send her the details soon, and she could come whenever she felt ready. The teen thanked him quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. As the maestro walked away, she remained standing under the streetlight, holding the sheet of music. She felt a strange warmth build inside her, a mix of nervousness and hope. She read the notes again and again, tracing her finger along the melody she now knew better than anyone. When she finally reached home that night, the house was quiet. She walked to her room and placed the sheet of music on her desk. She sat down and stared at it for a long time. It felt like a door had opened in front of her, a door she had never expected to find. She closed her eyes and thought back to how everything had started. How she had found the old music sheets in a forgotten shop. How she practiced in secret. How she played even when no one believed she would ever be good enough. She remembered all the moments when people told her she should stop dreaming, but she didn't stop. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. She kept staring at the sheet of music, as though making sure it was real. She washed her face, tied her hair back, and walked to the piano in the living room. The keys felt cool under her fingertips. She placed the completed sheet in front of her and began to play. The music flowed with ease, warm and soft in the quiet morning light. She felt the emotion in every note. The piece was complete now, but she could still feel where the music had once been unfinished. She could feel how her own playing had changed it, shaped it, lifted it. It felt like she was playing a memory. When she finished, she sat still for a moment. Her hands rested on her lap and her eyes started to water, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything that had happened. Later that week, she visited the music hall again. The maestro greeted her with the same gentle nod as before. He introduced her to a few other musicians, all of whom seemed curious about her. She felt shy at first, but the maestro stood beside her, guiding her gently. He showed her new pieces to practice, some simple, some more complex. He explained how each one had its own story. He told her she didn't need to play perfectly, only honestly. She listened closely to every word. Days passed, and she practiced more and more. She stayed after lessons, sometimes replaying the same melody until her fingers ached. But she didn't mind. She loved the feeling of learning, of growing, of finding new meaning in the music. As time went on, she and the maestro grew comfortable working together. He learned how she thought about melodies, how she felt through her fingers instead of thinking through rules. She learned how he approached music with structure and discipline. Together, they balanced each other. One afternoon, the maestro told her that a small performance was coming up. Nothing as grand as the night they met, but still important. He asked if she would like to play. She felt nervous, but she nodded. When the day came, she wore the same simple dress she had worn the night of the big performance. The hall was smaller, quieter, but still elegant. People filled the seats slowly. The maestro stood at the side of the stage, watching her with encouraging eyes. When she stepped onto the stage, she remembered the bright lights from that unforgettable night. But this time she felt different. She felt ready. She sat at the piano, took one calm breath, and let her fingers rest on the keys. She began to play the completed piece. Her heart traveled through each note, carrying the emotions she had collected along her journey. The melody rose gently, then softened, then rose again. People listened with full attention, drawn into the story she told through her playing. Even though the hall was small, it felt full. When she reached the final chord, she held it with a steady hand, letting it fade naturally. Then she lifted her fingers. The audience clapped warmly, not loudly, but with sincerity. She stood and bowed, her heart full. The maestro met her backstage and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. He told her she had done beautifully. She smiled, a shy but proud smile. As she walked out of the hall that evening, she held the sheet of completed music close to her chest. She knew her life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. She knew she had a long journey ahead, full of challenges and growth. But she also knew something else. She finally believed in her own music, and that belief would guide her for the rest of her life.